At the age of 17, I became a member of the church led by this man, Apollo Quiboloy, in 1918. I was a freshman student. I was eager and active in the community, even spending a significant portion of my college years living at the parsonage where he resided. In 1988, I made a difficult decision of my life to dedicate this to his ministry, driven by the belief that true fulfillment and salvation lay in serving God fully. This choice meant leaving behind my family, my career, and the person I once was. Despite the resistance of family and friends, I pursued my conviction. I joined a pioneering group that struggled to meet basic needs, but my desire to serve God fueled my persistence. Over time, I gained his trust and became a respected worker within the ministry. As the ministry grew, so did our blessings. We experienced answered prayers and expanding membership, which deepened our commitment to serving God. Apollo Quiboloy, whom I revered, was considered as God anointed, and his words held absolute authority. I respected him deeply, viewing him as truly the man of God. From the moment I dedicated my life to the ministry until 1993, I experienced a profound spiritual awakenings. I felt forgiven, my love for God deepened, and I was proud to serve alongside a man I believed to be holy. But one day while in Manila, I received a long-distance call from him. He informed me that he had received a divine revelation intended for me and instructed me to travel to Cebu, where he would share this important message. He was also scheduled to preach in Cebu that Sunday. Upon arriving in Cebu City, we arranged for him to stay at the Park Place Hotel in Fuente Osmeña. That evening, he instructed me to remain in the hotel, while Nilda Linda, the assigned worker, returned to the worker's house. When we were alone, I asked if I could just sleep on the sofa as it was a suite room. Instead, he insisted that I would sleep beside him and even said in Bisaya, compatible gyud taging kay parehas man og color ang atong suot. Translated, we are compatible because our outfits were of the same colors. I was wearing red pajamas with white dots, while he was dressed in a red t-shirt and white pants coincidentally. His words made me feel uneasy and quite nervous, and I saw a different personality in him. But I was quick to dismiss that unusual feeling. And because I had previously witnessed Ingrid Canada or ICC, Teresita Dandan, TTD, and Velina Salinas slept in his room alternately, it led me to believe that it was just normal and harmless. Moreover, we had been conditioned to suppress any negative thoughts about him. We were warned that any suspicion on him would reflect our own personality, using the words found in 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 15, I quote, "To the pure, all things are pure, but to those who are corrupted and do not believe, nothing is pure. In fact, both their minds and consciences are corrupted," unquote. And in those days, absolute obedience was a must. We needed to have an unquestioned loyalty and reverence toward him. Sleeping beside a man I believed to be chosen by God was for me then a great privilege, an opportunity for a sinner like me. But what followed shattered my sense of faith and trust. Without a word, after turning off the light, he embraced me, undressed me, and violated me with his lustful act, and left me in shock and speechless. He then said, "This is the fulfillment of God's revelation." He explained that God had revealed to him that I was to partake in God's life through him by surrendering my body, soul, and spirit. He also mentioned that other girls would go through him in a similar manner. His words were strange, but I was too shocked to respond. The following day after that Sunday worship service, Apollo Quiboloy left for Manila, while I was left to carry on with my duties, including organizing carolers for our annual fundraising. Confusion consumed me. I felt betrayed by my faith, by him, and even perhaps by myself. I began questioning whether what had happened was indeed God's will or simply a gross abuse of power. When I returned to Manila, I was once again instructed to sleep in his room. Fear gripped me, but defying the anointing of God was unthinkable. We had been taught that such disobedience would invite a curse. The next morning, he asked if I understood God's revelation. I remained silent, unable to process what had happened. He then referenced me to Philippians chapter 2, verses 6 to 12, explaining that just as Jesus humbled himself and obeyed God, even to the point of death, so he too must obey God's will by partaking in carnal things. He claimed this was necessary for him to understand the human experience and to fully empathize with others. He even told me that he had also been reluctant to accept God's revelation, but as God's chosen one, he had no choice but to act on it. I was more confused with his explanation, but I could not complain. I wanted to go out from the ministry, but I lacked courage. I did not know where to ask help. I had cut all the bridges behind my life, and I could hardly go back because it would mean starting all over again. My family was poor, and I had no connections. My option was to stay because I was still bothered with what if it was indeed God's will? December of the same year was an escape for me. Caroling as one of our sources of funds, and which had been participated in by every member of the ministry all over the country, became my excuse of staying away from the worker's house in Manila where he stayed. In January 1994, I was in his room with Ingrid Canada, the international coordinator of the church, Tessie Dandan, the national administrator for the church in the Philippines, and Felina Salinas, his personal assistant. During that,
Miss Teresita, before you continue po, yung nabanggit nyo ng 2 beses, Ingrid Canada, nandito po ba siya sa harapan ninyo?
yes, katabi po siya ni Mr. Quiboloy.
Sila po, yung nagtaas ng kamay. All right, salamat po. Please proceed, Miss Teresita.
During that meeting, he informed the girls that I would be included in the inner circle. Right there and then, I realized that these women had likely endured similar experiences. Without any words, we shared a mutual understanding. None of us dared speak about what had happened to us. There were reports from my assistant in the logistics department in Manila that I had secretly sent money to my family. Then, she informed me that ministers wrote letters to ACQ and reported that I tempted and fornicated with them during my visits to their satellite churches. I was so shocked to learn of the sudden accusations. I also wrote a letter and enumerated the real circumstances of my life with all the ministers I came in contact with in relation to our aggressive fundraising, being the National Logistics Coordinator. However, that was not enough. I was then forced to write a long letter of confession, making it appear that I was a sinner who committed all kinds of sins, including those I had committed before joining the ministry. I complied, believing that through this written confession, I would be totally forgiven from my old sins and burdens and be completely sanctified. In detail, I wrote everything I thought was considered sin I had committed from childhood until the present. I also implicated ACQ in my sins. It had the same tenor of the letter I wrote in Hong Kong in 1994. And this time, he was furious. Then ICC instructed me to revise my letter. I was told not to implicate ACQ and to state that I was the sole sinner and I was filthy. Upon realizing how angry ACQ was, I revised my letter out of fear and stated that I had sinned because I truly was filthy. In detail, I imagined scenes.
Ms. Teresita, yung paulit-ulit yung binabanggit na ICC, sino po yun?
Ingrid Chavez Canada po.
Sila pa rin po. All right. Please proceed.
In detail, I imagined scenes and I made it appear that I had committed them all. That was how stupid I was to obey and exaggerate my story. Just to appease the anger of our leader, Apollo Quiboloy, not knowing it would become my death sentence later. My exaggerated story was then distributed to all his leaders and ministers, and they believed I was filthy, I was pervert, and I was wicked, painting me as the sole guilty party, while ACQ remained innocent. Little did I know this confession would lead to my condemnation within the ministry.
And Ms. Teresita, pag sinasabi nyo ACQ, sino po yun?
Apollo Quiboloy po,
All right.
October 15, 1998. I was sent back here to receive a punishment through prayer and fasting in the guise of spiritual discipline. And the fasting they planned for me was beyond my imagination. It took me 7 months to suffer hunger and isolation in the mountain of Tamayong in Kalinan, Davao City. They placed me in a small, dark, elevated room beside a kitchen, separated only by a mat and walls. My bed was rough, made of uneven slabs, with exposed nails pressing into my back as I slept. I woke up this morning in pain, with no beddings, and the cold October nights left me shivering. I requested a blanket and a mat, but I was denied. Every day from 8 to 5 p.m., I followed a strict routine, regardless of the weather, enduring hunger and isolation. No one allowed near me, as I was labeled filthy and deserving of this punishment. Members were forbidden to speak to me. I was physically very weak and so depressed. I prayed that God would just take my life. Ilang beses po ako nanalangin na sana kunin na ako ng Panginoon. I started to question God and wondered if this was truly a divine process or simply human punishment. I asked myself, is this ACQ's way of retaliating because I rejected the life he imposed on me? It felt like vengeance and disguised as spiritual discipline. My only solace came from reading the Word of God from Genesis to Revelation over and over again. Every day was a struggle of faith. I struggled to believe that the process was still the perfect will of God for me. I struggled to believe that I really was a sinner and that I was recuperating from my spiritual disease for the lack of faith. That was to justify my present pains and to at least lighten my burden of loneliness. On January 8, 1999, I gave ACQ a resignation letter and I requested for a fare so that I can travel back to my home in my province. He did not approve my resignation letter. I pleaded to Ingrid, and like a child, I cried for help. But she remained untouched, telling me that it was a divine process. After that conversation, misery doubled. I had no money, and I was still physically weak, so there was no way for me to go out from the compound of the prayer mountain. Waiting for the restoration was the only alternative at the moment. If not for the comforting words of God, surely I would be totally gone out of my mind. They continually accused me of sins they alone knew, unimagined, that would always lead me into fasting. It eventually hardened my heart because I started to realize that the purpose of doing it was to totally break me down and to even slowly kill me. I no longer saw the reason to stay. I submitted my resignation as a full-time volunteer worker for the second time. But Apollo Quiboloy refused it again. A week later, on September 30, 1999, I decided to leave without asking for permission, determined to free myself from his control. It was only when I left out of the group, that I finally clearly understood that the man I had believed to be God's chosen and holy was an impostor, oppressor, and deceiver. He manipulated me using his authority and power as God's anointed. I thank God that he took me out from his bondage, from that ambiguous feeling of fear mingled with so much love and loyalty to my Redeemer, Jesus Christ.